and welcome to today's episode of the Property Pod. I'm Libby, and today I'm joined by Candy from the Federation of Small Businesses, and she's going to give her top tips for small to medium-sized businesses. So welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for joining us.
No, thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. And tell me a bit about the Federation of Small Businesses then.
So the Federation of Small Businesses, obviously I'm biased, but, we're a really interesting organisation, essentially set up to support small and medium-sized businesses. And that ranges from people who are self-employed up to businesses that have around 250 members of staff. And we've got actually really nice sort of backstory. So we were set up in sort of 1974 by a guy called Norman Small, who was self-employed. And he was really outraged, actually, when they brought in the sort of Class 2 national insurance contributions. So he galvanised loads of support from fellow self-employed people. And then here we are today, an organisation that really stays true to our campaigning and lobbying values. And essentially what we do is we stick up and stand up for small businesses. So we work really closely to champion the needs and the rights of small businesses to government and advocate for change. So that might be from helping getting the furlough scheme across the line, to campaigning for statutory sick pay rebates that we helped make sure the government brought in last December, through to sort of campaigning for things around, the national insurance contribution increase that has hit businesses really hard, or the inflation, energy costs that are impacting on small businesses. So we stand up for small businesses essentially, but we are a membership-led organisation. So across the UK, we've got in excess of around 150,000 members.
Oh wow, okay.
So our members essentially join us, like I said, to have that voice, to be listened to by leaders in sort of national and local government. But we also provide loads of services that are really practical that business owners need when they're setting up and running a business. So that ranges from a legal helpline and a resource hub where business owners can tap into a whole range of templates, from contracts to health and safety templates, through to getting support to chase late payments, to getting support around PR, comms, HR support. So it's basically all those back office services that if you're a bigger business, you rely on, but when you're smaller and you need that additional support, that's why people join FSB, to get that support to set up and help their business grow.
So you do a bit of everything, really. It's great, yeah.
Yeah.
All the different functions that a business needs. Oh, fab. So you're all covered.
Yeah.
So what struggles are local businesses facing currently?
As we know, we all listen to and read the news, inflation is rampant at the moment, and that's impacting businesses really, really hard. So inflation, we've got rising fuel costs, rising energy costs. And actually, when you're a business and you run a small business, you're really vulnerable to those price increases, particularly around energy costs. So if you run a business, you don't fall under the Ofgem energy price cap. So some of our sort of local businesses, they're seeing their energy costs increase, by double or triple the amount. A local brewery, their energy costs have increased by about £22,000 a year.
Oh my goodness.
So you've got inflation hitting businesses really hard from, like I said, fuel, energy costs, feeding into actually products and goods and materials as well, increasing those overall costs. And then businesses are also really finding it challenging to recruit staff and keep hold of good staff. So we've got, a real skill shortages, and that's across many, many sectors. So, our smaller businesses that are reliant on staff to be there to able to operate their business, they're finding it really difficult to attract staff, to come and work for them, and then to keep up with the demand for higher wages. So our small businesses, they're kind of in this perfect storm where they've come out of COVID, all the restrictions and the financial constraints to do with that. And then here we are, in the middle of, the worst inflation that we've seen for decades. And alongside that, they've also seen, tax hikes. So they're finding it really challenging. And actually, government, as part of, the reason we exist, to call on government to step in and provide some extra support for small businesses.
And do you think that the pandemic has sort of impacted that in terms of skills shortages and recruitment? Do you think that's made a difference?
Yeah, it's a combination of factors. Yeah, I think there's an element of that, but there are some sectors in particular that are struggling to recruit staff, and part of that could be young people sort of coming out of education and not particularly sort of favouring some sectors, maybe such as construction. So there is lots of joint working across our area between sort of local authorities and education providers and obviously businesses to really focus on where those skills gaps are and to work cohesively together to try and plug those. But I think another real challenge, like I said earlier, it's around wages. We're in this spiral where obviously the cost of everything is going up, and people, understandably, they want to see their wages going up so that they can afford to pay, for the rising costs of everything from food to fuel. But when you're a small business, you don't have lots and lots of cash in the bank to keep, up with constantly increasing wages as well as the increased costs in other sort of things for your business. So that can also be a big challenge. So I think there's multiple factors why businesses are finding it difficult to recruit. But I think probably the sort of positive picture is that joint working is happening across our area. And there are some other sort of really good schemes as well. So there's a project called Career Ready, and that's run by a sort of not-for-profit, which is working with sort of disadvantaged young people across the area, helping them, as it sort of does what it says on the tin, to get them career ready, to give them work experience, to develop their skills in terms of going into the workplace. So there are projects and there's lots of joint working to tackle these sort of skills and staff shortages. But I think ultimately we probably need to see a little bit more support coming from government to make sure that young people are seeing, small businesses as a really positive and viable option for when they're going into the workplace.
Well, it's really great to hear that they are sort of putting that in place with the career ready stuff. Just because when I was in school, I remember it was more sort of like you have to go to university and that's sort of it, and that's like the only path into a career, and they didn't really talk about skills and the practical side of it. So that's really interesting to hear. Really great. Yeah, it's fab. And what is your advice for struggling businesses?
I would say probably seek help early on. It might sound like a bit of a cliche, but don't suffer in silence. Again, across our area and actually nationally, there are organisations that are there to support you. And actually, one thing that I find speaking to businesses, it can be really challenging to know actually what support is out there. If you're in the loop, that's great, you're sort of in the know. But if you're not, and you run a small business and you're really busy, running your business on a day-to-day level, you often don't have time to go out and actually find out what support is there. So in our region in particular, you've got something called the New Anglia Growth Hub.
That's funny, they were one of our other guests. That's so funny, yeah.
And the New Anglia Growth Hub, they're great because they have business advisors to provide, business support, but they also have pots of money, that are available as grants that businesses can apply for. There's organisations like Mentor and NWES that provide, practical support, and that might be training from, writing first business plan to, getting savvy on digital media. So I think I would definitely say to business owners, if you're struggling, have a look at what support there is, because there's lots out there. At FSB as well, we do lots of networking for our members. So we have sort of online and face-to-face networking events, and actually a lot of small business owners, they find that peer support really invaluable. So I would say reach out, find out what support is there, and actually reach out to other small business owners as well, because that peer support can be invaluable, particularly when you find yourself in a period where you think, this is incredibly challenging, and sometimes you need that sounding board and bit of additional advice just to find your way through.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And how can small to medium-sized business owners improve their cash flow?
Yeah, again, cash flow can be really challenging when you run a small business. You know, when you start up, you're probably not going to have loads of money in the bank. And again, what I find is, you know, if you're a small business owner, you often set up a business because you are brilliant at what you do, you know, really passionate at what you do. And you're so busy doing the sort of day-to-day running of your business and probably the marketing and hiring of staff and all that kind of stuff, that some of the planning, you know, it kind of gets pushed to the bottom of the to-do list. So I would say, you know, when you start out, take time to do your business planning, to do your financial plans and forecasting. When you're doing forecasting as well, you know, it's really important to review that regularly, probably at least quarterly. But one of the biggest challenges and threats actually to cash flow for small businesses is late payments. So basically other businesses, particularly if a small business is in a supply chain, basically not paying on time. And this is an area actually that we're doing a lot of campaigning on, because for us, we know that our members are seeing actually more businesses paying them late or customers paying them late. And this can have such a huge impact on their cash flow. So for us, it's really important actually that businesses, you know, commit to a sort of prompt payment code. The boards actually take responsibility for making sure they're paying their suppliers on time. And I would actually say, you know, whoever's listening today, actually, if you guys, you know, use suppliers, make sure that you're committed to paying those people on time, because, you know, morally it's the right thing to do, but actually economically as well. In the sort of UK, you know, over 99% of the businesses that we have, they're sort of small or medium-sized businesses. You know, they contribute over half of the UK turnover. So small businesses are integral to our economy. So actually, when small businesses are impacted by things like late payments, that impacts the wider economy. One of the things actually at FSB that we do, I think like I mentioned earlier, is we do have a late payment support service and sort of contract templates, so businesses can actually get those set up from the beginning, you know, with clauses in around payment terms, financial penalties, so that from the offset, you know, if they are supplying other businesses, they can show clearly what the expectation is around payment and actually what the financial penalty will be if they're not paid on time. And I think that's really important to get that really clear at the beginning so that late payments can't come and, you know, really have a huge negative impact on your business.
Definitely, it's important. Yeah, definitely. And how can an SME owner sort of cut down on costs and save money?
Yeah, again, I think it really varies depending on the business. But, you know, like you and I do when we're sort of buying stuff, shopping around for the best rates from suppliers is really, really important. Other ways to cut costs, I think, you know, again, it depends what sector you're in. But as I sort of talked about earlier, inflation is meaning that everything is going up in terms of costs. So it can actually be really difficult at the moment for small businesses to cut those costs. But I think being prudent and good financial planning and doing that from the offset so that you're really clear on what your cash flow is, you know, you're able to forecast, hopefully you're in a position to build up some reserves. That is really important. But again, I think, you know, like I mentioned earlier, speak to your peers, speak to other small business owners, because, you know, they might have some really great advice actually for suppliers that are you know, delivering sort of goods or services that are really good value for money. So I think it's all back to being prudent, being proactive in your planning, and shopping around for those best deals.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And it's good to speak to other people and get ideas and sort of, come together and support each other, I guess. Yeah,
absolutely. And we see that all the time actually when we're holding networking events. You know, business owners, they'll talk to each other and they might say, oh, actually, you know, I'm looking for a marketing agency, can you recommend someone? And often it's those personal recommendations that work out really well. And I think, you know, building that network around you of other business owners so that you can share and you know, benefit from their knowledge and experience is really, really key when you're running your own business.
Yeah, definitely. And how do you think small to medium-sized businesses are adapting to sort of the new normal, as it's put, now that we're moving out of the pandemic?
Yeah, New normal. I mean, I probably sound very gloomy, don't I, today? I probably regret asking me on,
No.
but I think businesses are really in a state of flux at the moment. So every quarter we sort of run a survey which is focused on obviously small businesses, and actually the last results that we had come through for the second quarter of this year in the east of England showed that actually business confidence is really, really low, and there's been a big drop since the first quarter, as you would expect. We're seeing now some businesses actually reducing the number of staff. So I think businesses are in a state of flux, low business confidence, low consumer confidence that then feeds into business confidence. So having to move really quickly, be really nimble, but there is that feeling that businesses don't know what's around the corner. And obviously that's filtering through into, investment decisions, hiring decisions, and growth decisions as well. So again, I think probably it's really important to go back to the first point that I made earlier on, that government are integral to businesses being able to adapt and businesses being able to thrive. So there are some things that we're calling on government to do, such as supporting some of the smaller businesses by bringing them into the Ofgem energy price cap. Whoever ends up Prime Minister, getting them to maybe think again about the increase in national insurance contributions. So these kind of things, the taxes and inflation and the business costs, to actually be able to give small businesses a sense of normality, to be able to plan and look to the future. As you said, sort of we came out COVID, huge amounts of flux, anxiety, many businesses, unfortunately, pushed to the brink. And now here we are, COVID is still around, it's still impacting on businesses, but we sort of kind of gone from the pandemic into this sort of, financial instability. And I think for businesses to understand what is normal, we just need that additional bit of support coming from government, I think.
Yeah, definitely be good to get the boost, because I suppose even just the tax and national insurance implications, just everything makes a difference at the end of the day, and it's all kind of like a vicious circle.
Yeah,
so it's good to get this point.
And it does impact on businesses, thinking about whether they're going to increase, jobs and staffing, and it has that knock-on impact. And like I said, small businesses, they are major players in our economy. They hire around sort of 3/5 of people here in the UK. So if small businesses are hit, the whole economy takes a hit.
Yeah, we sort of touched on this earlier, but what do you feel are the main challenges coming out of the pandemic to small to medium-sized businesses?
Yeah, I think, like I said, to reiterate, particularly at the moment, it's inflation, and it's that state of flux and not knowing what's around the corner. We talked about earlier, that example I use of a business that is seeing their energy costs go up by 22 grand a year, and that's not uncommon. And bigger businesses, they often have sort of buying power, but smaller businesses, they're sort of stuck in the middle. They don't get rebates such as a council tax rebate that us as individuals got. And they don't have that buying power, so they're stuck, they're kind of held hostage to the ever increasing costs of energy and fuel, etc. So inflation is really challenging, the low consumer and business confidence as well. I think businesses, they've been through so many years of challenges that they need some, I suppose, confidence about what the future looks like.
Yeah, definitely. And again, we kind of touched on this before, but how have you seen the cost of living and inflation impact small businesses locally? Like, have you found that people are reducing their spending habits? I know you said about low consumer confidence, but have you seen sort of other examples of that?
Yeah, I mean, particularly speaking to businesses that make products or deliver services that could be, I suppose, deemed as discretionary or a luxury. They're particularly nervous that, when everyone starts sort of looking in the bank and, it's not looking like a cheery picture, that people are going to start thinking, actually, where can I make savings? And, some of the first things that you start cutting back on are, the meals out, going to the pub, buying that expensive, bottle of gin from, a local sort of gin distillery. And it's those kind of services that are particularly getting nervous and seeing, a fall in orders. But consumers are, understandably making some real choices about how and where they spend their money. And that is really impacting on businesses. And small businesses in particular, I think, they've kind of held back on, I suppose, raising their prices, because they're trying to sort of absorb those costs because they don't want consumers to go elsewhere. But to be honest, I think they've kind of reached their limit to being able to do that, because as I alluded to earlier, if you're a small business, you haven't got loads of cash in the bank, so you can't keep absorbing those price hikes. So I think I'd probably urge, consumers, everyone watching, we're all consumers, keep supporting your local small businesses, but also, I'll probably echo, as you would expect me to, that call to government, come on, get behind small businesses, let's look at some pro-business policies, otherwise we're going to see a lot more go under.
Definitely. Even just I'm guilty of it as well, but thinking about, I don't know, if you get a coffee out, not going to Starbucks, because they could probably survive better than your local little coffee shop. So definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And, anything we can all do, like you said, to prioritise small businesses, independent retailers, shop local, all that kind of stuff that I think we all kind of did a lot more in the pandemic. Yeah. And it was great because it was sort of, everyone really got behind the small businesses, because actually it was the small businesses that did the things like the grocery drops to vulnerable people, getting groceries delivered to people who couldn't leave their homes. We all remember, don't we, coming out of lockdown and getting our first sort of out of lockdown haircut, all that kind of stuff. Our small businesses, they were there for us and they were there supporting their community. So we just need to remember that we need to continue supporting them while they're going through these difficult times.
Do you think it's sort of dipped a little bit since the pandemic? Because I remember there was a lot of dialogue and stuff on social media about shop local, and I do feel like even from a consumer perspective, I feel like that might have dropped off a little bit. Do you think? Or
I think to be honest, it's all back to people feeling the pinch, and having to make tough choices. We're all going to the pump and seeing the sort of price hikes when we're sort of filling the car up. So you then start questioning, actually, do I need to make that extra journey, out to the countryside to go to a pub, or going to the coast, or going to see people? And, we're all being, I suppose, a little bit more strained in what we're doing in terms of spending money. And that obviously is filtering through to businesses, and they in turn are having to then, I suppose, sit and pause and think about, whether they can continue to grow, whether they can create more jobs, because there's just that real sense of nervousness at the moment.
And do you think that the current contest for the Conservative leadership in 2022 and the government sort of uncertainty, do you think that's affected small businesses as well?
Yeah, I definitely think, what's happening politically, is filtering through to businesses, because they don't know what's around the corner. I mean, obviously we've got the leadership contest at the moment, and we are continuing, as we always have and always will, to speak to government and advocate for small businesses. But what we need some really sort of clear vision and direction and commitment to support small businesses, and it's got to be pro-business and it's got to be pro-growth, and pro-small business. And obviously come September, we'll know who the new sort of leader of the Conservative Party and the new Prime Minister will be. And then hopefully we can start seeing some movement towards really getting behind our small business community. And we will, continue to campaign for small businesses and, to work with government about how the policies can best be put in place to provide that tailored support for small businesses.
Okay, well, that's great to hear anyway. Yeah, definitely. And how do you think small businesses are dealing with the greater sort of demand from the general public and stuff for like working from home, flexible hours? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it all depends on the business. So I think overwhelmingly, one of the many amazing things about small businesses is when you work for a small business, you kind of feel like you're part of that family. You know, when you work for a small business, often you get to work across loads of different areas and to grow as the business grows. And businesses, you know, are adapting. So many have, you know, I suppose adopted almost like a hybrid working arrangement. And where they can, you know, small businesses will be flexible and they will support their staff. But it all depends on the nature. I mean, obviously, if you're running a high street store, you probably can't have your employees all working from home. But where it's possible, I know that small businesses, you know, they work to support their staff and ultimately to try and retain staff, because, you know, when you've got happy employees, you know, that definitely filters through to your business and then ultimately the service that your customers get.
100%, yeah. Well, thank you so much for that. It's been great to have you on today.
Yeah,
thanks
for inviting me.
No problem. And for all you guys at home, if you did enjoy this episode, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.